I think I'm going to speak English. It's going to be easier for me. But if you allow me, I'm going to thank the minister in his language first. And Nicolas, thank you very much. I think that what we are seeing here in these 2 days is exactly the kind of trust that is required for a good social dialogue. So thank you very much, Nicolas, for this invitation.
I sound better than that. Look, we always talk in the teaching profession about tools, time, and trust. And I kind of think that those are three sort of categories that we can use when we think about when we go around the world. We kind of look at whether or not the conditions or the environment is appropriate to allow for dialogue to take place. Trust is obviously absolutely essential. And there's the professional trust, there's human trust, there's personal trust. And I think when the trust is betrayed or when the trust is eroding, it's very difficult to build on top of that. Yeah? But trust is something that gets constructed. Time, in the case of social dialogue, is when there's purposeful policy making and decision making to give the time necessary to listen to the profession and then also to the government so that they can actually build the time in. If I go around the world, I think about the different models that exist for social dialogue. A lot of people always think about the Nordic model, right? And the Nordic model, I think, in some ways, it's an institutionalized model that when we've looked at it, actually the ILO and UNESCO and others have put together some different toolkits around social dialogue. I know OECD. The thing about it that makes it, I think, effective in that context is that regardless of what's going on politically, there's an expectation that the dialogue will happen. It's in the institution. It's institutionalized. It's part of law. It's part of practice. It's part of culture. That dialogue will happen regardless of what happens at the ballot box. We do have to talk. You know? I agree with Andreas in terms of a tool, which is evidence. And I think it's always important to be looking at evidence, you know, at different levels. I think the comparative evidence that we've been bringing to the ISTP to create a space to have a conversation, because if you have your different evidences, it's not going to work. But sometimes too, it's helpful to look at the evidence through the perspective of teachers' representatives and teachers' unions and what that looks like. You know, so in some places there's evidence about, you know, we've run evidence about absenteeism, and that became a sort of very touchy topic a number of years ago. You know, but when you kind of look into the evidence about the causes of what is actually going into teacher absenteeism around the world, you know, I was in a country in the Middle East recently last year, and they were talking about the problem of absenteeism, but the evidence actually showed that teachers hadn't been paid for 9 months. So that's not that's an absence of political will and responsibility. I don't know how many people would stay in their job if they weren't being paid. So evidence needs to continuously be analyzed, needs to be discussed, it needs to be looked at, it needs to be renewed when it changes, that needs to be shared. I think the other thing that's really important are principles. And Andreas was talking about our 3 principles with ISTP. We also have them around, we've been developing these guidelines with AI and education. But principles allow people to kind of red flag or raise a flag when things aren't going the right way. But it also, it builds the trust and say, okay, this is what this is about. I'm going to use a quick example when I think COVID was a time, and I think for many of you, during COVID, ministries and teachers unions that didn't have good relationships, didn't have good communication, didn't have clarity about expectations and what the plan was. However, those institutionalized, the countries that had that, were able to immediately work off of that trust and put in place quickly all sorts of types of policies and make emergency decisions that you couldn't just declare. And you know, I was actually thinking about Argentina with the previous during COVID. They had a dialogue there, and they were able to immediately go online, right? And they were in Denmark. It was a similar thing. I even talking to the unions, like, oh no, the minister already called us. We know it has to hit this threshold before we're going to go back, and this is the sort of safety precautions and things like that. People know, they have a trust of that evidence. But there were also places where teachers literally found out the morning of, by reading the newspaper, whether or not their school, they were expected to go back to school, right? Or what platform they were going to use, or how they were going to be evaluated, or what they were going to do about the kids they couldn't see on screen who couldn't connect. And I think out of that, and we actually did a COVID ISTP. We were able to show really important principled social dialogue, open, evidence-based, learning from each other. Really does make a difference. Like Andrea said, it actually improves processes, outcomes, builds trust, strengthens institutions, and makes better policy that makes a difference for teachers in the classroom. So yeah, thank you.